Player beats off to my voice and gets caught. By Reddit user Dabachi Kaio. Greetings and hello. I am Kaio, a perma GM of many years. I've run God knows how many games at this point, so I have a fair amount of horror stories. But this one is particularly egregious, but I still laugh at it and decided on a whim to type it up while I'm bored at work. Most of the interactions of the problem player could be passed off as playing a particularly horny swashbuckler, and I choose to ignore the mounting red flags because, haha, who the F is going to touch themselves in the middle of a session? Oh my sweet summer child. I am a straight man, and this is somewhat important to the story. And as I preface, I don't care what your particular enjoyment of another human's genitals lead. The setting is a Pathfinder 1st Edition homebrewed campaign where the theme was random adventures and just being guild members and adventuring with a very large open world feel on Roll20. I had 4 players in this particular instance. 3 of them were normal players. Nothing really noteworthy about them in terms of the story, though the gnome wizard emotionally hurt me and my gibbering mouthers. The players were a gnome illusionist wizard, a nice dude. He was very creative with his illusions. A human cleric of Sheila. She was friendly but quiet. Combat was more her thing. A half-orc fighter. He was a pretty normal fighter, and he used a spear and a shield. Then there was Captain Fat. Captain Fat played a male elven swashbuckler, and he professed that he was gay. Session 0 goes quite well. We get the plot and themes, and the players' wants and limits on what they want to see in the campaign. There were no real red flags, aside from Captain saying that he finds my voice attractive. I tell him that I'm flattered, but not interested in using D&D to find relationships, as it's one of my rules. We are here to smash dragonheads in, not fellow players. He seems to take this in grace and understanding. No problems, right? I wish. Session 1. The players are introduced to the bartender, a retired adventurer, and an old character living out his dreams and helping new adventurers by filtering them to safer quests, while the more dangerous ones go to more experienced questers. His name was Belcath. I like to start my sessions off by allowing each character to introduce themselves to him while he serves them a drink that gives them a small boost for the next level or session. Magical drinks that cause things like you feel the sense of righteous might and a sense to pursue justice. Gain a +2 on your attacks. The effects of the drink are based on a d20 roll. Players roll initiative. Gnome gets a potion that made him feel the same elation and wonder of the first time he cast a spell. Fighter gets a potion that made him feel the fear of death grasping at his heart before he steeled himself. Then we get to Captain. Captain gets a drink that reminds him of those feel-good things of summer, whimsy, wonder, etc. To note, the drinks are only alcoholic if the player desires, and unless they roll a nat 1 on fortitude, I won't make them drunk unless they wish to be. Captain says, "Oh, I do love a big strong orc serving me drinks." He then asks to roll diplomacy to attempt to seduce the orc bartender. I tell him I will allow it, but to give me a perception check first. He rolls the perception check and passes. I tell him, you see on the orc's hand is a wedding ring, leaving no uncertain terms that he was married. Captain then says, "I roll my diplomacy anyway." I told the orc, "If you keep serving me drinks like this, I might just have to put a ring on you." Now, I allow for players to flirt with my NPCs, or even date them. I I just fade to black if things get down and dirty. Belcath, being a man of good humor, replies with a loud laugh that fills the bar. I'm flattered, kid, but I'm in a committed relationship, and my love of my wife burns hotter than her breath. Now, I make Belcath marry for 3 reasons. 1. He is an 18th level fighter, and I do not wish to have a DMPC. I just want to be able to roleplay as my first character. 2. His wife is an elder silver dragon that he impressed when he fought her to a standstill. And 3. It gives me a reason to have a strong spellcaster that can craft any items they need that they would struggle to buy or find normally. Captain says, "Oh, I don't mind being your side piece." I laugh it off and move on. Swashbuckler's gonna swashbuckle. The cleric gets a drink that makes her feel like someone is watching her, giving her a bonus to her perception. The session goes on, and no real issues arise. Session 2. There were no real red flags that I would have noticed during the session. Rather, just things that I see now retroactively. Captain would breathe heavily, occasionally on the mic, passing it off as having to go off and do something, and hurrying to get back. Sure, it's D&D. People from the heavier side of things are fairly common. Captain continues to flirt with random NPCs, teetering that line between SFW flirting and NSFW flirting. We are all adults, so it's whatever. Sessions 3, 4, and 5. Everything continues as usual, except Captain starts muting himself so he doesn't bleed from the mic. He would do this for 4 to 5 minutes at a time, and only once or twice a session. So it makes sense if he is doing running like he said he was. Session 6. The Cluster Effect. It's Session 6, and we are about halfway through a small dungeon crawl, and they are starting to approach the boss of it. After a break, and doing a ready check for players, we begin the boss's monologue. I'm getting into good pace, saying, blah blah blah, you'll never defeat me, puny adventurers. But then, we hear it from his mic. A weird noise, like flesh slapping flesh rapidly. The call goes quiet, and the only noise coming through is the slapping flesh and a heavy panting. Gnome says, "What the F?" And I say, Swashbuckler, what the F are you doing?" The Swashbuckler quickly mutes himself and started to type in chat, saying that he was slapping his leg out of boredom. Slapping his leg. Right. I am a seasoned GM, and I take no crap from bad players. So, naturally, I banned him from the server, booted him from the game on Roll20, and blocked him personally, as did the other players. I didn't quite know how to continue from there, so we ended the session. The fighter quit the game not long after, no longer wishing to be a part of it, and the campaign died before we hit Session 7. Thanks for reading. I hope you enjoyed my suffering, and unwittingly helping a dude get his rocks off without my knowledge. Well, that was disturbing. I swear, if I had a nickel for every story I've read where a player used a tabletop RPG as an outlet to get their rocks off during playtime, I'd have like 4 nickels. Which isn't much, but still disturbing that it happened that many times. Captain Thap's excuse of slapping his leg out of boredom would have probably been more believable if the party weren't about to fight a BBEG, and if he didn't quickly mute his mic and told the other players that excuse via chat. Then to think of all the times that they heard Captain breathing heavy, and then muting his mic a few times a game, you then realize that he's probably been doing that all along. It is a shame that this was the catalyst for the game falling apart, but it is understandable with that stain being on it, and the game being a reminder of that event. Hopefully, OP was able to Dungeon Master again after this, but this time with players that can keep it in their pants. I think we need a kitty palate cleanser after that story. There we go. That is a bit better. Now let's move on. Dungeon Master runs game for players to collect harems. By Reddit user Tiv the Melancholy. I have a lot of RPG horror stories, but this is the one that I've probably told the most among my own personal group. This was pre-COVID, so a few things may be fuzzy, but this is the gist of what I can recall. The important players are as followed, fake names only. Me, player. Me, obviously. Alan, player. My brother. Sunshine, the Dungeon Master, and source of all of our problems. Melody, player, and Sunshine's daughter, 19 years old, in case you end up wondering. Second source of all of our problems. Had magic plant, agriculture powers, and was also a vampire, I think. Rob, player, additional source of problems. Had magic crafting powers, and an infinite hammer space. Kevin, player, just kinda there, but he also was part of the problems, to some extent. Super strength powers, basically the Hulk. A few years ago, Alan invited me to join in a game that his friend was running. At that point, I had played in many of Sunshine's games, and I thought I knew exactly what to expect from her games, but I hadn't played with them in quite some time. The thing to know about Sunshine is that she doesn't like to play any well-established titles when it comes to tabletop RPGs. Years ago, she started making her own system, which she largely came up with after watching Sword Art Online. She loves the concept of being trapped in a video game and being forced to actively practice things in order to get experience and to get skill points. She also loved isekai animes, but is never satisfied with sending us to one single world, and instead will force us through portal after portal, from one world to the next, as soon as she's bored with the setting. She also constantly changes the rules of her system, based on what she thinks is interesting at the time, and would sometimes force us into worlds where all of our skills reset because, quote, the mechanics must be different here, thus making us start over from scratch. This has affected literally every game she's ever run since she's watched SAO. This is made all the worse by the fact that she once was a halfway decent storyteller, but has become so obsessed with her system that she's largely done away with the storytelling part of the game. Well, Alan gave me the pitch for the game. He described a self-insert isekai kind of game. Self-inserts also being one of Sunshine's favorite things. We were ourselves forced into a video game where a god would speak to us, give us power that would effectively make us divine rank 0, and then we would go on adventures and become heroes. It's nerdy and a little cringy, but most tabletop RPGs can be a little cringy, especially if you're not willing to at least give them a try. So I agreed to join, mostly because my brother didn't really want to join the game alone, and he needed someone, me, to throw under the bus if he really needed to leave. Well, that is certainly thoughtful of him. I expected this to be a brand new game, or for the only players to have only played a session or two, but when we joined, the rest of the party had already mastered their powers and were proper gods. We also didn't start out meeting the god like we were told we would. Why was all of this? Well, because the other players had already been playing for at least a month by that point, and when they heard, out of game, that we would be joining the game, They thought it would be funny to kill the god that gave them their powers, so that we wouldn't start with any powers. Yeah, seriously. More than that, Sunshine made a house rule years ago that drinking a god's blood or eating their true flesh could steal some of their powers. So they basically killed the god and drank its blood until they were as high in divine rank as their bodies would allow. They justified this by saying, quote, "It's not like we knew in game you were going to show up, and he was the a-hole who trapped us here, so it makes sense that we would kill him." Still, that is kind of a dick move, with them knowing that your characters wouldn't start off with any powers. I mean, some friends you got there. I was immediately annoyed by this point, but the other players said that they would give us some of the blood eventually, because the corpse of the god apparently never stopped bleeding after they killed it. But they couldn't give it to us at that very moment, because without the blessing of a god, or a deed that proved us worthy, the blood would simply kill us. I pointed out that literally all of them were gods who could totally give us blessings, but they got upset with me and insisted that we would have to worship them for that to work. I said that was BS, but they ignored me and refused to let us get anything in the way of power. As far as power scaling goes, I would say something to the effect of, imagine a first level character going through a dungeon with a level 20 character. But that would imply that we did anything as exciting as combat. Just assume though, literally every skill check from Alan and I was completely pointless. Yeah, that certainly sounds like a crappy way to start off playing a tabletop RPG. You would think that the Dungeon Master would have something in place for OP and their brother, to not be totally underpowered when compared to the other players. Not that it matters, because it did not take long at all for us to realize what this game was actually about. Maybe 30 minutes into the session, the godly players invited us into their pocket dimension, which was a thing they just had. In the pocket dimension, they had a city that Sunshine said was full of mostly elves. Alan and I were made to do perception checks, and we both realized that literally every elf was a woman, and was in some state of pregnancy. Oh man, it's gonna be one of those stories. I asked what the deal was, you know, like a fool, and Rob explained that all of the elves were his wives. According to him, all of the men of their village had been murdered, and the women were taken as, quote, pleasure slaves by goblins. So when the party saved them, many of the women were already pregnant, but that not all, because apparently they all decided they either had to marry or kill themselves, quote, for their own dignity, or some crap like that. So Rob, quote, stepped up and married all of the elven women, and apparently was granted the divine domain of fertility for his, quote, good deed, and could thus forcefully change the parentage of all of the elves' pregnancies. What? And if you think that that's the wildest part of this story, I weep for the both of us. I'm sure you're wondering why I stayed, and I'll be honest. It's because I'm a doormat, and so is my brother. But also because Melody cut in to tell me about the harem she had also collected, and it hit me with such a force that I was genuinely stunned into silence. Melody proceeded to explain that fictional worlds from movies, TV shows, books, anime, video games, you name it, they were all real, and rifts in reality would sometimes open, and they would be pulled into those realities. What she continued to explain was how she met her wife, Harry Potter. Wait, what? This game was already ridiculous. But what? Yes, I'm serious. She then explained the most fanfiction-y BS I've ever heard, of Harry being forced to hide as a boy, even in the wizarding world, because, as she put it, she was cursed, and if she dropped her disguise, literally, every man would be unable to resist assaying her. Yeah, that is... What? She then gave me a list of basically every man in the Harry Potter universe, and explained that they had all apparently already done this to her. Included on the list of characters was Dumbledore, Voldemort, literally all the Weasleys, and multiple members of Harry's own family. The list was much longer, but you get the picture, and I would like to go back to suppressing this information. The party had apparently shown up, learned what was happening, and proceeded to kill literally everyone who had assaulted her. They then somehow uncursed Harry and whisked her away to their pocket dimension, along with multiple other Harry Potter characters, all of whom were also teenage girls, and who were also now members of the various party members' harems. I was stunned into silence for most of the rest of the game, as was my brother. When the game ended, we were too uncomfortable to even talk about it, and we both would have the good sense to just drop out of the game. But the next week, they called us and asked if we were coming, and we were too awkward to say no. Alan really didn't want to go alone. Heck, didn't want to go at all. But we were raised to be people pleasers, whether we like it or not. So we both reluctantly went back. But why though? Even if you have a hard time saying no, after everything that happened in the game so far, if you could call it a game, I think saying no thank you would be pretty easy. I don't remember exactly what happened in all of the sessions that followed, except for one, because it was really weird. Oh, the next one was really weird. Not all the pregnant elves and female Harry Potter stuff? What even is this game? We ended up in the game, Stardew Valley, and were recognized as the new farmers in town. We didn't know what the trigger was for how to leave this world, but Sunshine informed us that we had 2 years of downtime, after which the ghost of the farmer's grandfather would show up and judge our farm. She then basically asked us what we wanted to do with our time. I said, F it, you all have magic and I don't have anything. You can all work the farm. I'm gonna go meet people around town. Which, for some reason, seemed to upset them, even though Melody had cleared the farm and had perfect quality crops growing, and Rob had completely upgraded all the houses with his crafting magic in basically the first day. At some point, I decided if they could be cringe bastards and have ever-growing harems, then I could romance one of the characters. I romanced Emily, which Sunshine was thankfully not very descriptive about. In fact, she was never very descriptive about romance in the game, and mostly just said, "Roll me a charisma check," or something like that. It really was like collecting trading cards. Like, the other players never really acknowledged their, quote, wives once they had convinced them to come into the pocket dimension. The other player ended up romancing literally every other woman in town, including the ones that could not normally be romances, which is to say, all the married women in town. By the way, all the dateable people in town that were usually men, they were all women in this world, and also came with us. Also, Kevin discreetly killed Mayor Lewis right before we left because he, quote, disrespected Marnie, who, as you may have guessed, was one of the women he had added to his collection. My brother, you may be pleased to know, did not partake in the romance, and instead spent the entire time fishing and making friends with only 2 people, Willie and Linus, who he proceeded to adopt and bring into the pocket dimension when we left, because, quote, if you can have a bunch of wives, then I can have a couple roommates. It was a very weird session. Right, as compared to all the other ones. This whole story feels like a fever dream. Ultimately, we went to a total of 8 sessions, 3 of which Alan went without the divine gift we were promised at the very beginning, and I went without for almost 6 full sessions. I don't even remember what Alan did exactly to earn his power, but I remember in the middle of session 6, I texted Alan and told him that if I didn't get a damn divine rank by the end of the session, I wasn't coming back next week. He told me not to worry, and that he was sure it would happen. A bit further into the session, he said he needed a smoke break and that he would go get pizza, before insisting that Sunshine came with him. And wouldn't you know it, when they got back, Sunshine gave me a scene of me sleepwalking, somehow finding the corpse of the dead god, and hearing the voice of the dead god commanding me to drink its blood. I think it gave me fire and metal powers or something, but it was so underwhelming that it didn't really matter. Well, it seems like the powers didn't really matter in the first place. This whole game just sounds like a harem simulator with no combat. Having a divine rank did not make the game more fun. It just made me realize how much more boring the game really was in hindsight. All we had been doing from the very beginning was just reality hopping and collecting women, many of which Sunshine insisted on giving tragic, assault-filled backstories. Eventually, away from the table, I asked Alan if he was actually having fun in the game, and he looked disgusted by the very question. He admitted that he just wanted to play in one of Sunshine's games again, because they used to be such good friends, and she used to be such a good DM. But ever since she started letting Melody play in her games, they had just gotten weird, and they entirely catered to whatever Melody wanted. Alan ended up telling them that we wouldn't be back, and I'm pretty sure he threw me under the bus to get out of it, but I told him that he could, so it's fine. And the game fizzled out on its own after that. Neither of us have been part of one of Sunshine's games since, and I haven't even seen her or her kid since. I wish there was a moral here, other than don't be a doormat, especially when you're uncomfortable. But good God. Good God indeed. That whole game sounded like a hodgepodge of insanity. With everything that took place, I would hardly call that a tabletop RPG. I mean, the whole thing sounds like something that would come from the mind of Chris-chan. Between the harem of pregnant elves, a cursed female Harry Potter, and gods that you drink the blood of to gain powers, it was just so confusing, and I would have quit multiple times during this game of insanity. I mean, I just got done reading it, and I'm still confused. And like OP said, if there is any moral to the story, don't just stay in a game to make other people happy. If you aren't having fun, you don't owe anybody your time. No D&D is better than bad, whatever the heck this was. Now, I know that I definitely need another dose of Kidium after whatever the heck that was. There we go. Now I feel a little bit better. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, especially if you leave a like and subscribe. I mean, y'all did get 3 doses of kitties today. And may your games remain horror story free. Until next time. Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's episode, we have a story about a player that joins a game of Pathfinder with a group of coworkers, only for the game master to target her and give favor to his girlfriend. But before we get into that, here is Nipsey with a special request.
Remember to like, comment and subscribe. I really like this window.
Thanks, Nipsey. I hope that they do that, as we're getting pretty close to 20k subscribers. And I have all of you, and the kiddies, to thank for that. But with that said, let's get into the story. And strap in, it's a bit of a long one. GM thinks player with oversized sword ruins his game world, takes a finger as revenge. By Reddit user, Fingerless Fighter. Background. When I was in college, some friends introduced me to D&D. I instantly got hooked, and the group I was in was fabulous. We played many different systems and campaigns for the 3 to 4 years that we were together. Fast forward to 2016, and I had just graduated and moved to a different state for work. After a few months of settling in, I decided that I wanted to try to find a new group. One day at work, I mentioned that I wanted to get back into D&D to a coworker, Billy, and he mentioned that a game that he was GMing just wrapped up. He went on to say that he was interested in starting up a new game with some other coworkers, and asked if I would like to join. I accepted, as he seemed like a good guy, and I honestly felt more comfortable playing with coworkers than people that I didn't know. After asking around, Billy and myself managed to recruit enough people to start up a game. The story. The group assembled at the GM Billy's apartment for Session 0. We were playing Pathfinder, and most of the players were brand new to tabletop RPGs, aside from Billy and his wife. Everyone I didn't already know from work seemed friendly. Billy advised us of the rules, which included things to make sure that players stayed comfortable and weren't thrown into any type of uncomfortable or uncontrollable situation. The main rule, however, was that we could only build characters using the core rulebook, since the majority of the table were new players. Okay, cool, no issues there. I will admit I was a bit bummed, as I already had a class picked out, but no worries. Core keeps things simple. The night ended with Billy handing us pre-built character sheets to run a short combat session. Overall, I left the first meeting feeling positive. The next day, myself and the rest of the players created a group chat to start working on character concepts. I decided that since they were new, I would wait until the others had picked to fill out what was needed. A few days later, everyone had picked, and we ended up with Monk, Cleric, Bard, and Sorcerer, who was Billy's wife, and I decided that I was going to play a fighter. A few days before Session 1, I showed Billy my character, a not-so-smart or wise human named Joram, who, with some feat work, wielded an oversized bastard sword. Though Billy had some concerns. Billy: so, you're playing a male fighter who is big and dumb. Are you going to be able to roleplay a man properly? Me: yes. I've played male characters before with no issue. Billy: just know that I take roleplay encounters very seriously, and I will hold you to your character. Just make sure you keep up the act. I feel like I should point out that I prefer to play male characters in RPGs, even though I'm female. I learned sorta quickly that NPCs and players tend to point out that you're a girl when you play them, and want to roleplay as such, so it's easier just to be a man's man. Shortly after that conversation, we had our first session. Things were good at first. The party met up at some small tavern in some small town. Standard adventurer's fare. Joram and Monk became quick friends, with Monk vowing to someday round out some of Joram's sharp edges. The party left town for the big city to complete a quest that was given to them by the mayor. On the way out, the party got into their first ever combat encounter together. And, oh dear lord, that first combat encounter. We were ambushed by a band of 4 to 5 highway robbers. Everyone but Monk and Sorcerer rolled horrible initiative, which meant most of the party was taking their turns after the enemies. Monk goes first, and rolls his first dice of the game. A crit failure. After rolling from a table, Billy announces that Monk has hit himself below the belt, which causes him to be stunned for, rolls a d4, 4 turns. Monk's player is visibly upset, as he knows that he's most likely out of the rest of the encounter. Then Billy announces that it's Sorcerer's turn, and his wife picks up the dice. A quick side note. When I first met Sorcerer during Session 0, she bragged about playing Pathfinder for years with Billy, and specifically mentioned how she only ever played Sorcerer because she knew the ins and outs of the class super well, and loved big flashy fire magic. Somehow, with a combination of roleplay, asking Billy what her spells did, pondering the best location to use area spells, and theory crafting the ideal attack, Sorcerer managed to make her turn last 21 real-world minutes. Sorcerer kept the long trend up and caused a bunch of other issues during the campaign, but that's a story for another time. By the time she decided on the play that she wanted to do, most everyone at the table had checked out and were looking stuff up on their phones, including me. Sorcerer's spell managed to deal light damage to one of the enemies, which led them to taking their turns. Then finally, it was my turn. Joram swung his big sword and got a lucky roll, dealing max damage and outright one-shotting one of the highwaymen. With another lucky roll, I downed another, as I had the ability that let me attack multiple targets in a turn, so long as they were next to each other. Billy then paused the combat and asked for my character sheet. I handed it to him, and a few minutes later, he hands it back and says, "We need to talk." He brings me outside onto the balcony and starts lecturing about how power gaming is in poor taste, blah blah. I said that I wasn't trying to sneak anything by him or power game, and had shown him my exact character earlier in the week, reminding him of the conversation that we had previously. He grumbled a bit and said that oversized bastard swords would look too silly for a normal-sized fighter to wield, and this campaign was too serious to allow it. It ruins the game world I created. So I offered to change weapons before the next session, or just roll a new fighter outright. But he declined, saying, "Just don't surprise me with anything else." At this point, I'm uncomfortable looking up at the 6-foot angry GM and just want to get back inside, so I just agree. The session ended shortly after, with the rest of the highway robbers running away and nobody else getting a combat turn. At this point, I was honestly thinking about leaving the game, as the first session left a pretty bad taste in my mouth, but I continued anyways, as I didn't want to deal with awkwardness at work. Plus, I really just wanted to play D&D. During the following session, the party finds a cave, and after a few puzzles, happens upon a chest with multiple magic items in it. Monk gets hand wraps that work with his abilities. Sorcerer gets a cloak that gives her an extra spellcasting slot, and the others get something that helps their class. I find a magic ring, and after making a particularly high spellcraft roll, Sorcerer tells me that the ring will improve my chance to hit by 2. This effect just so happens to negate the penalty that I take from using an oversized weapon, so I ecstatically put it on. Though immediately, my HP starts to drop, as starting from the finger that the ring was on, my arm blackens. Billy, it turns out the ring Joram so carelessly put on is cursed. Maybe now he will think twice about equipping random items from a dungeon without getting them properly checked first. Me, out of character. Why would Joram think that the ring was cursed? Not only did everyone else get non-cursed items, but the sorcerer rolled really high as well in that check, and pretty confidently told me that it was safe. I'm not sure what else I could have done there. Billy, this is a powerful cursed item. Sometimes you can't always trust your party to get things right. I try to take the ring off, but of course it won't come off. Billy tells me that I have 2 minutes, real-world time, to find a way to remove it, or Joram will die. In the end, everything that everyone tries doesn't work, and we end up cutting off the finger that the ring was on. Billy then announces that because I am now missing a finger, I had to take additional penalties to attack, as well as any skill that requires the use of that hand. Can it be restored or healed at a temple? Short answer, no. That cursed ring was so powerful that any attempts would fail for sure. Was there a magic item that was not cursed that I could have from that chest? Nope. I asked him later, out of character, if there was any solution other than cutting off my finger, but he dodged the question with, Nothing that your character could think up with his low intelligence. And that's it. That's how my character lost a finger, permanently, with no way of recovering it. This post is pretty long, so I'm marking it as multiple parts if anyone else is interested in hearing the rest. There is still plenty of horror to write about from that campaign, including my character forcefully getting retailed due to receiving a 35-year jail sentence in a quite inescapable prison, his replacement getting nerfed to the point of being unplayable, and Sorcerer's multiple meltdowns when she isn't being treated like the main character by the rest of the party. Yeah, that sounds like some major pettiness and singling out on the GM's part. It's pretty obvious that he did that on purpose to OP, because he didn't like how well OP performed during the fight. Either that, or because she's a woman playing a male character. And by the sounds of things, that campaign became much, much worse. But luckily, we don't have to wait to find out how, as we move on to Part 2. This will be Part 2, and a continuation of the story I posted the other day, about a GM who did not like me playing a male fighter with a large sword, which ended with my player character losing a finger. As a brief reminder, the important names to remember are Joram, my fighter, Billy, the GM, Monk, and Sorcerer, the GM's wife. Rewinding a bit before the first session. One thing Billy wanted for us to do was to create some sort of engaging backstory that could inspire subplots or help with character development down the line. Alright, awesome. Backstories are great. Billy even started up a Skype group for the game that, alongside our work chat, could be used to help the new players develop their characters' backstories. As some commenters mentioned in my last post, yes, I did end up borrowing from Pathfinder's iconic barbarian when creating the character and backstory. Joram was a fighter from a prestigious clan of warriors who passed down a large bastard sword. The sword was claimed long ago from a great battle with a giant, and was given to the person who won in a contest of strength against the current leader. The warrior who received the sword was exiled from the clan until they got word of the current leader's imminent demise. They would then come back and take over as leader of the clan with new experiences and adventures to guide their future decision-making. Somewhat basic, I know, but I figured it was easy enough to work with, and explained why Joram carried around and used a large bastard sword. Picking up from where we left off last time, Session 3 or 4 starts, and the party ends up finding a secret document that more or less explained the main story hook of the campaign. Orcs, goblins, and some evil kingdom, led by the BBEG of course, are gathering together in massive numbers in an attempt to take over the entire kingdom. Something like that. The party, not really knowing what to do with the newly acquired information, decided to continue to the capital city to deliver the document, along with the mayor's request, from the starting town, to the king. Sorcerer objected to our plan immediately. You see, Sorcerer had played a different campaign with a different party, as a different sorcerer, in the same homebrew world. The campaign we're playing in was 30 or so years after the previous one, so the histories were still very much connected. Sorcerer, out of character, tells us about a village close to the capital city filled with spies, espionage experts, and the quote-unquote shadow ruler of the entire kingdom. She continued by telling us that it wasn't too far away and would be a much better place to deliver important documents to. She pretty much then repeats the same thing, but in character. Monk asks if we could pause the game for a second, and calls out Sorcerer for using knowledge her character shouldn't know. Monk: hey, just out of curiosity, how would your character know this? Me: yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but didn't we all establish that we were new to adventuring? This place sounds pretty secretive for just any old person to know about. Sorcerer: she would just know about it from a book or something. She's pretty smart and well-read. Monk: I'm not quite sure that's how that works, is it? Billy: her previous character from this world is her great-grandmother, She passed it down in a diary. It's backstory. One thing to mention is that Billy was staring daggers into me the entire time we paused the game. I can't remember if he was also staring at Monk, but I don't think he did. We resumed the game and decided to just go with Sorcerer to the super secret town where the Shadow Ruler lives. On the way, we stop at a mountain keep that has been converted into some sort of rest stop with food, drink, and an inn. Bard, Monk, and I decide to have some fun and spend some coin by drinking, dancing, and participating in various other bar activities. A barmaid comes up to me during this and asks me if I would like to hang out with her, but I politely decline as I'm having fun with my friends. Though she insists, offering free drinks if I would. Again, I decline and go back to the arm wrestling contest that I'm currently having with Bard. The other players get some scenes, and then I'm told to roll multiple reflex saves, each with an increasing number of penalties for being various stages of drunk, despite only having bought one drink the entire night. Eventually, I fail one of these saves, and gasp, oh no, I've just accidentally hit the barmaid with my mug, spilling the remainder of my drink all over her Sunday best. Okay. Billy. She's really mad and starts loudly slinging swears at you. You can see the rage in her eyes. Joram. I'm terribly sorry, miss. I must not have been paying attention. My mistake. Billy. Joram tries to say that, but because he is so drunk, it comes out in slurs and sounds much ruder than intended. Because of the failed reflex, he stumbles while talking and accidentally pushes her down. This scene went on for a little while, with nothing I could do to calm it down. At one point, I even pulled out a few gold to pay for the ruined clothes, hoping that would smooth it over, but the gold was slapped out of my hand. To be honest, I was a bit confused over the entire thing out of character. Eventually, the scene died down a bit, with the manager or owner coming over to soothe things over. He even offered to comp our rooms for us. How nice. So we accept the offer and headed up to bed for the night. The party wakes up in the morning to a mostly empty inn or tavern and quickly notices that all of our stuff, minus the clothes that we slept in, is gone. Panicked, we rush to the front where we find the owner who tells us not to worry. Each morning, staff comes by to collect our stuff and washes clothes, polishes items, and sharpens blades. After waiting around a bit, the party gets all of their items back. Everything missing was returned good as new, and with some temporary bonuses applied. Now, when I say everyone, I mean everyone but Joram. Joram got most of his stuff back, but his sword was mysteriously missing. Looking out the window after rolling some perception checks, the party notices the barmaid from the previous night smashing Joram's sword on the stone path leading to the back door of the tavern, with chunks flying off the blade, and the sword almost snapped in half. Before the party could stop him, Joram ran out of the tavern to try to stop his sword from being completely destroyed by yelling, "Hey, what are you doing? Stop it!" The barmaid dropped the sword, spun around, and pulled out a dagger. Me. I yelled to the party, "I have a blade raised against me," and lunge at the barmaid. Billy. Are you sure you want to do that? Me. I mean, I've seemingly caught a thief red-handed who not only stole from me, but is actively threatening me with a dagger. I see no reason why I would hold back. Billy. Alrighty, everyone roll initiative. A little bit of a side tangent here. I was both upset as a player and as a character at this point, although I wasn't particularly attached to playing a fighter with a large sword. I did feel like I was being punished for something that I didn't know I did wrong. I had specifically asked during the first session if Billy wanted me to change my backstory and weapon focus, and he said no to both. If this was some character-specific development based on my backstory, which it wasn't, then I might have understood. But even then, I would have liked to have that kind of conversation prior to the session taking place. Something Billy had mentioned to me in a prior session was that I needed to be careful with the weapon and make sure it didn't break, as no one would be able to fix or craft another for anything shy of 9,000 GP. Losing my sword here would leave me weaponless, with a handful of useless feats, at least for a little bit, and really impact my backstory in a negative way. The idea of that alone didn't feel very good, and left me with a sour taste in my mouth for my own character. Alright, back to the story. Before combat started, I decided to fight using only my fists. I did have a backup weapon, but my plan was to use non-lethal attacks with the assistance of the party. I was hoping that we could resolve the whole thing quickly, and maybe make peace with the barmaid after everything was resolved. I mentioned my intentions to the party, and Malk runs up and lets a punch fly, dealing some non-lethal damage. The barmaid takes a swing at it with the dagger and misses, and I deal a non-lethal hit. Bard sings a song, and then Sorcerer takes her turn. Sorcerer: I cast Glue Seal on Joram. Me: what? Why? Sorcerer: because I can tell he's really upset, and there must be a way to solve this without violence. Me: she drew a knife on me. Sorcerer: well, you did charge at her out of nowhere. threatening manner. Billy, alright, roll a reflex. I fail, and fail the subsequent check to break free from being glued to the floor in place. Billy decides combat is over by having the ragtag team of watchmen come over to investigate the issue. They place me, and only me, under arrest while they get everyone else's statements. Most of the party tells the same story about the events of the previous night and the current. Situation, except for Sorcerer, who adds in that I, suddenly and for no reason, rushed the poor girl. One of the watchmen grabbed my now beat-up sword from the ground and hold it in front of me. Is this what all the fuss was about? He then snaps it in half by beating it against the wall. I get hauled away, waiting to be judged for my crimes at the nearest town. The game ends, and I, along with most of the other players, are a bit quiet. Billy picks up on how upset I am and asks to speak to me outside. I follow, bringing Monk with me. We talked for a bit about the whole situation, and I expressed my displeasure with some of the in-game events and being singled out randomly. Billy explained that he was really not purposely trying to target me in or out of game, and admits that the big sword and the other unrealistic, not sure what he meant by this, features of my character really did bother him after all. He adds on that he might have expressed it on a whim, in-game, and in a very bad way, so he apologized for the treatment out of game and asked if I would stay as a judge. Ultimately, I told him that I would give it another shot, mostly because I had become friends with everyone at the table, including Sorcerer and Billy himself. We were all pretty much the only employees at our company in the same 20-something-year-old range group, and these weekly sessions were a great way to get out of the house to meet up. I asked Billy if I could just roll up a new character, since I felt this one was pretty much done with. He said sure, and we went back inside. And so yeah, that is the anticlimactic end of my adventures with the mighty swordsman Jorah. He got sent to Fantasy Alcatraz, and I think was eventually murdered in a prison riot. I do feel bad that his clan is without a leader, but that little plot thread never came up again. Though, spoiler, only one person's backstory was actually explored in-game during the time I played with the group, and I'll leave it open for whose it was. I think I'll write one more post about this campaign, and the various horrors that occurred after my new character, Ragu, the Ranger, joined the party. Yeah, I'd have to say that OP was definitely being singled out there. Hell, the DM basically admitted so by stating that OP's build bothered him, even though it was approved beforehand. Though at least it sounds like they talked it out like adults, which is why communication is a cornerstone in any tabletop RPG like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder. Though, by the sounds of things only get worse from here on out, and I think I can guess whose backstory became the focus of this game. But before we find out, I think we all need a kitty intermission. There we go. Now I think we are ready to get to part 3.
Is it recording?